The bustling atmosphere of the gala was alive with the clinking of glasses and the murmuring of excited conversations. It was the event of the year, an exclusive dinner held at one of Washington, D.C.'s most prestigious venues. Influential figures, politicians, and media moguls were gathered in the grand hall, the chandeliers casting a soft glow over the black-tie crowd. It was the kind of evening where everyone had a story to tell and an image to protect. Yet, among all the flashing cameras and eager chatter, there was one person who remained entirely still. Melania Trump sat quietly at her table, her posture poised and impeccable, her face serene. She looked every bit the First Lady, her elegant red dress standing out in the sea of dark suits and evening gowns. Despite the attention swirling around her, she kept a calm distance, her eyes not fixed on anyone but rather deep in thought. But it wasn't just the glittering event or her stunning appearance that made people whisper. It was her silence. For months, the media had speculated, each outlet taking a turn in dissecting her every move or lack thereof. Yet, Melania remained tight-lipped, watching the world around her in quiet contemplation. As the evening progressed, it was clear that many in the room had grown accustomed to her reserved nature. She wasn't the loudest in the room, nor the most outspoken. But that night, something felt different. The air seemed to change, the hum of conversations slowly turning to an expectant silence. There was a tension in the room, and it was all building towards the moment when Melania would finally speak. A reporter, known for his sharp questions and pointed commentary, had been circling the table where Melania sat, eyeing her as he approached. He had been waiting for the perfect opportunity, and he saw it as the moment to make a mark. He knew her reputation. Quiet, poised, never one to argue in the spotlight. He leaned forward, his microphone poised, ready to catch her every word. "Mrs. Trump," he began with a tone that almost seemed like an accusation, "you've often been portrayed as distant, reserved, and unwilling to engage with the media. How do you respond to those who believe your silence is a way to avoid taking responsibility for your actions?" The room fell eerily quiet. Everyone turned to look at Melania, their gazes waiting for her to give them something, anything, that could fuel the narrative they had already decided for her. Melania's eyes met the reporter's with a calmness that sent a ripple through the crowd. She didn't speak right away. The seconds stretched on, and the anticipation in the room grew thick. People exchanged nervous glances, but Melania remained composed. Her silence wasn't a sign of defeat. It was a quiet power that radiated through her. She knew exactly what she was doing. Finally, Melania stood up, her movements graceful and deliberate. She addressed the reporter, and the room held its breath. "You've spent so much time talking about my silence," she began, her voice steady and clear. "But have you ever considered that there's power in silence? Sometimes. It's not the loudest voice that carries the truth, but the one that chooses to observe, to listen, and to learn." There was a moment of stunned silence, the weight of her words hanging in the air. The reporter's confident smirk faltered, and for the first time, the room realized that Melania's silence wasn't a void. It was a strategy. She continued, her tone now carrying the quiet strength that had been so often misunderstood. "You think my silence is an avoidance of responsibility? No. It's a choice. A choice to allow others to speak, to reflect, and to understand the full picture before passing judgment. The truth doesn't need to be shouted. It only needs to be seen for what it is." The reporter, caught off guard, struggled to find his words. He had expected her to flinch, to react defensively, but Melania had exposed a deeper truth about herself and her approach. This wasn't just a response. It was a revelation. As she spoke, the room seemed to shift. The tension that had hung in the air like a storm cloud dissipated. People began to understand that Melania's silence wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a testament to her inner strength and her ability to remain steadfast, regardless of the noise around her. For the first time, the media's portrayal of her began to crack. They had built her up as a passive figure, someone to be overshadowed. But in that moment, Melania Trump revealed that the quietest voices often carried the greatest weight. The reporter, visibly stunned, didn't know how to respond. He had no follow-up questions, no retort. What could he say to that? He had expected an emotional outburst, a defensive reply, but instead, he had been met with a profound lesson in composure and strength. The rest of the room, once skeptical, now sat in awe of Melania's poised response. They realized they had underestimated her. What they had once seen as silence, they now understood as wisdom. She had chosen this moment to speak not just for herself, but for all those who had been silenced, misjudged, and misunderstood. As the evening continued, the media buzzed with the shockwave of Melania's words. Reporters scrambled to reframe their narratives, scrambling to understand the true message she had delivered. This wasn't just about a political figure. It was about a woman who had navigated years of public scrutiny with grace and dignity. The moment left a lasting impression. For Melania, it was a pivotal point in reshaping her public image, not as a woman of silence, but as a woman who had chosen her words carefully, speaking when it mattered most. The truth behind her silence was now clear. It wasn't about avoiding responsibility. It was about owning her power, her choice, and her ability to control the narrative on her own terms. The next day, the media was abuzz with Melania Trump's words. Every news outlet picked up the story, dissecting the power behind her silence. Social media was flooded with reactions, some in awe, others critical. But one thing was undeniable. The First Lady had captured the nation's attention in a way no one had expected. For Melania, however, the storm of media attention was nothing new. She had lived through the harsh glare of the public eye for years. But there was something different this time. This wasn't just a fleeting headline. This was a turning point. People were starting to see her differently, not as the passive figure they had once described, but as a woman who had the power to command a room with her words, and even more so with her silence. As the media frenzy continued, Melania remained quiet. She refused to give any interviews, allowing the words she had spoken the night before to resonate on their own. It wasn't arrogance, it was strategy. She understood the power of leaving things unsaid, of letting her actions speak louder than any follow-up statement. Behind closed doors, Melania's team met to strategize. They knew that this moment could be the start of something bigger. For years, they had worked to establish her as a voice of compassion, of strength. But now it was clear that the world was ready for a different narrative, one that was grounded in understanding, in listening, in responding when it truly mattered. The day after the gala, a meeting was called with the president. Melania, poised as always, entered the room with a quiet confidence. As she sat down, her eyes met Donald Trump's, and the weight of the previous night's events settled into the room. "You did well," Donald said, his tone softer than usual. He had watched her address the reporter, and he knew that this was not just a moment of personal strength. It was a message to the world. It wasn't just the media you took on last night. It was the world's perception of you. Melania nodded, her gaze never wavering. "It was never about proving anything," she replied. "It was about showing people that silence can be more powerful than words. Sometimes, the truth speaks louder when it's not shouted." Donald leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in thought. "You've always been about making an impact quietly. And it's your time to take control of the narrative. They've misjudged you for too long." Melania didn't respond immediately. She wasn't looking for validation. She was focused on the bigger picture. She had never sought the spotlight, but she realized now that it was time to embrace it, not for her own gain, but to make a difference in how people saw strength and leadership. A few days later, Melania made an appearance in a small town in the Midwest. The press was there, but it wasn't the media that she was concerned about. It was the people. Her visit wasn't about a photo op or a staged event. It was about connecting with those who had seen her only as a symbol of luxury and privilege, not understanding the depth of her character. She walked through the town square, meeting with families, listening to their stories, and speaking with those who had never had the chance to meet her. One elderly woman grabbed her hand, tears in her eyes as she thanked Melania for her silence and for not letting others define her. "You've shown us that we don't have to scream to be heard," the woman said, her voice breaking. "Sometimes, all we need is someone to listen. And you listened." It was in moments like these that Melania found her strength. Not in the flashy headlines, not in the praise, but in the quiet connection she made with people who were willing to share their lives with her. As she left the town, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The media could twist her words. They could attempt to define her, but she knew the truth now. She didn't need their approval to be heard. But even as she found solace in these small, intimate moments, she couldn't ignore the ripple effect of the previous night's confrontation. It had sparked something in the public. People were no longer dismissing her as just a figurehead. They were beginning to see her as a real person, a woman who could speak her mind when the time came, who had a purpose beyond her title. And then came the call. The White House had been contacted by a group of women's rights activists who had seen the impact of Melania's silence. They wanted to meet with her, to discuss how she could use her voice in the future to advocate for those who had been overlooked for too long. They weren't interested in empty words or political grandstanding. They wanted to hear her truth. In the meeting that followed, Melania listened intently as the activists spoke about the challenges they faced, the struggles that often went unnoticed. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer solutions right away. She listened. She asked questions. She reflected. And when it was her turn to speak, her words were powerful, measured, and direct. "I may not have the loudest voice, but my actions speak for me," she said, her gaze steady. "And I will use my platform to bring attention to the issues that matter most, especially the ones people aren't talking about." It was the start of a new chapter. Melania Trump was no longer simply the silent figure behind the scenes. She was becoming a leader in her own right, one whose strength wasn't defined by the noise around her, but by the quiet resolve with which she approached every challenge. As the days passed, the impact of Melania Trump's quiet but powerful moments continued to unfold. The media had initially been skeptical of her approach, but now they were forced to reckon with it. No longer just the wife of the president, Melania had become a woman with a voice of her own, one whose actions were more telling than the words she chose to speak. She had been underestimated for years, her every move scrutinized, dissected by those who thought they could define her. But Melania had always known something that others hadn't figured out yet. Silence, when wielded with purpose, could be a force more powerful than any public speech. She had used her quiet strength to break through the noise, and now the world was listening. The following month, Melania's charity work gained traction as the initiative she had begun to champion took shape. Her visit to the small town in the Midwest had not only been a moment of personal connection, but also a strategic move to bring attention to issues close to her heart. The media, who had once focused on her every outfit, now began to cover her efforts to support children's hospitals, advocate for women's mental health, and fight for underprivileged communities. Through her actions, Melania was shifting the narrative. She was no longer the silent First Lady, who simply played her part. She was a woman of substance, leading quietly yet confidently in a world that often overlooked the power of stillness. The lessons she had learned from her time in the public eye, lessons of grace, poise, and resilience, had now become the foundation upon which she built her legacy. Then came a turning point. A major television network, one that had long been critical of her, reached out with a proposal. They wanted her to give an exclusive interview. They wanted to hear her speak in depth about her experiences and her goals. At first, Melania was hesitant. She had always been careful with her words, avoiding the trap of overexposure. But she realized that this was an opportunity to speak directly to the American people, to explain her truth, and to solidify her place as an influential voice in the public sphere. The interview was scheduled, and the entire nation tuned in. Melania, dressed simply yet elegantly in a soft blue dress, sat down with the anchor, her demeanor calm, her presence commanding. As the cameras rolled, the interviewer wasted no time in diving into questions. "You've spent years in the spotlight," the host began, "but until recently, we've seen very little of you speaking out. Why the silence?" Melania's response was measured but direct. I've never been one for grand gestures or loud speeches, she said. I believe that actions speak louder than words. I've spent my time quietly working, learning, and understanding the real needs of people. Silence isn't weakness. It's a choice. A choice to listen, to observe, and to respond when it truly matters. The host nodded, clearly taken aback by her thoughtful answer. And now, you're using that silence to bring change, to advocate for causes that matter to you. What's next for you? Melania smiled, a quiet confidence radiating from her. What's next is continuing to make a difference. I'll use whatever platform I have to shed light on the issues that matter most, to make sure people know they're not alone. But it's not about me. It's about the people I can help. That's what matters most. As the interview ended, the host couldn't help but acknowledge the shift in Melania's presence. She wasn't just a first lady. She was a force in her own right, one whose journey had only just begun. In the months that followed, Melania's initiatives continued to grow. Her charity work flourished, and her message resonated with people all over the world. What started as a moment of silence had transformed into a movement of action, one that would continue to inspire future generations to come. And as for Melania, she continued to lead by example, knowing that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay silent, listen, and then act when the time is right.